I was 15 when they threw me into the rain. I was 31 when I walked back through their front door, and they had no idea what was coming. The most dangerous woman in any room isn't the one screaming, it's the one smiling while she holds all your secrets. The night my parents chose my sister over me, it was raining so hard in Buckhead that the marble steps of our estate looked like a waterfall, and I was standing at the bottom of them in a cotton pajama shirt and bare feet, watching the iron gate click shut behind me like the period at the end of a sentence I hadn't been allowed to finish. I was 15 years old. I had a fever of 103, and the last thing my father said to me, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders through Piedmont Park, who used to call me his Georgia Peach like it was the most sacred thing he'd ever named, was, "Get out. I don't need a sick daughter." He didn't even look me in the eyes when he said it. He said it to the doorframe. My name is Georgia Voss, and before you feel sorry for me, I need you to understand something. Feeling sorry for me is exactly what my sister counted on everyone doing for her instead. Sloane Voss was 16, beautiful in that effortless way that made adults trust her before she even opened her mouth, and she had spent the better part of a year constructing a lie so perfectly tailored to our family's particular vanities that even I, who knew her better than anyone, didn't see it coming until it was already done. Our family was the kind of wealthy that doesn't talk about money, because talking about money is for people who aren't sure they'll always have it. My father, Randall Voss, was a real estate developer who'd turned a mid-size commercial portfolio into one of the most recognized names in Atlanta's luxury market. My mother, Diane Voss nee Hartwell, had come from old Georgia money, the kind built on cotton fields and hushed-up histories, and she wore that inheritance in her posture, in the way she never raised her voice because she'd never had to. We lived in a 6-bedroom colonial in Buckhead that had been featured in Atlanta Homes and Lifestyles twice. We had a housekeeper named Ruthie who had worked for my mother since before Sloane and I were born, and a chef named Tobias who left on Sunday evenings and came back Monday mornings without any of us ever wondering what he did in between. We were that kind of family, the kind that looked perfect from the driveway. And the perfect ones always have the ugliest things buried in the backyard. Sloane and I were never close in the way people romanticize sisters being close. We were competitive in the quiet, expensive way that daughters of Diane Voss learned to be. Not catfights, not screaming matches, but a constant low-grade current of one-upmanship dressed up in politeness. Sloane was the older one, the one who got straight A's and played varsity tennis and looked like a J. Crew catalog in real life. I was the one who read too much and asked too many questions at dinner and had opinions about things my parents considered above my pay grade at 13 years old. My father loved us both, I think, in the abstract way men love their daughters when their daughters are performing the role correctly. My mother loved Sloane the way a sculptor loves a finished work, something she had perfected. She loved me the way a sculptor loves a piece that keeps fighting the chisel. The lie started in January of that year, when I was 14 going on 15. I'd found something I wasn't supposed to find, but I'll get to that. What you need to know first is what Sloane told them. She came to my parents' bedroom at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and she was crying, and Sloane didn't cry easily, which is why it was so effective, and she told them that I had been going through her room stealing money from her jewelry box, and that she'd confronted me about it, and I had threatened her. She said I put my hands on her. She showed my mother a bruise on her upper arm that she said I'd given her, and she said she was scared to sleep in the same house as me. The bruise was real. I know that now. What I didn't know then was where it had actually come from. Some secrets don't stay buried. They just wait until the ground gets wet enough to float back up. My parents didn't come talk to me that night. They didn't ask me anything. My mother went very still. That particular Diane Voss stillness that I'd learned as a child meant something had been decided, and my father went downstairs and poured 2 fingers of Pappy Van Winkle and stood at the kitchen island in his robe. And when I came downstairs in the morning, there was a coldness in the house that had nothing to do with the January air. They watched me at breakfast like I was something they were reconsidering. Sloane sat across from me with her orange juice and her straight posture and gave me one look, just one that I have never been able to fully describe to anyone. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't triumph, it was something more like calculation, like she was confirming that the pieces had landed where she'd aimed them. The next several months were a slow-motion dismantling of my place in that family. I was pulled from my private school and enrolled in a school across town. My mother's explanation was that some distance would be good for everyone. I lost my car privileges. I lost my phone for 30 days. I was no longer included in conversations about vacations or family dinners out. I ate at the kitchen island while my parents and Sloane ate in the dining room. Ruthie, God bless her, used to sneak me the good bread, the kind Tobias made fresh, and squeeze my shoulder without saying anything. Because Ruthie had worked for the Voss family long enough to know when to keep her mouth shut and still find a way to be kind. I was not allowed to defend myself. Every time I tried, my mother said, "Georgia, this behavior of denial is exactly what we're talking about," which is one of the most insidious things a parent can ever say to a child, because it turns the act of telling the truth into additional evidence of the lie. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I want you to feel the architecture of it, because that phrase, that single weaponized sentence, is what convinced me at 14 years old that I was living inside something that had been very carefully designed, and that Sloane hadn't done it alone. When a 16-year-old girl builds a trap that sophisticated, somebody older taught her how. By October, I'd gotten quiet in that way that scared people who knew me, because I was never quiet. I read, I observed, I started keeping a journal that I hid inside the lining of my winter coat, not because I was writing feelings, but because I was writing facts, dates, conversations I'd overheard, things that didn't add up. I was 14 years old playing detective in my own house, and the saddest part is that I was good at it. When your survival depends on reading a room, you get very good at reading rooms very fast. The night everything exploded was a Thursday in November. The storm that came through Atlanta that week was the kind that makes the news: flash flood warnings, downed power lines on West Pace's Ferry Road, the kind of rain that turns Buckhead into series of temporary rivers. I had a fever that had come on suddenly, the kind that hits you like a wall and makes the edges of everything go soft. I'd gone to bed early, and somewhere around 10, I was so disoriented from the fever that I walked into Sloane's room looking for the Tylenol she kept in her desk because I knew ours was out. She wasn't there. Her room was empty and her window was open despite the storm, and on her desk, next to the Tylenol, was her phone, screen still lit, with a text conversation open that I was never supposed to see. I read 3 messages before I heard her come back through the window, and those 3 messages told me everything I needed to understand about the last 10 months of my life, about the bruise, about the lie, about who had really been hurting who in this house. Sloane walked in and found me standing at her desk, and the look on her face in that moment was the only time I ever saw her drop the mask entirely. Panic, pure, unperformed panic. And then it closed back up, faster than I'd ever seen her recover. She screamed, not because she was scared of me, because she needed someone to come running before I could say what I'd seen. My parents were in that room in under a minute, my mother in her silk robe, my father still in his dinner clothes. Sloane was pressed against the far wall, tears already going, telling them I'd come into her room and grabbed her phone, and she didn't know what I'd seen, but I was acting crazy. She was scared. She didn't feel safe. And I was standing there in my fever-soaked pajamas with the Tylenol still in my hand, and I tried to tell them. I tried to say, look at her phone. Just look at what's on her phone. And my father looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger. Something worse, disgust. He said, "I don't know who you've become, but you are not welcome in this house tonight." He said, "Get out. I don't need a sick daughter." And then he walked me to the front door himself, not Sloane's room, the front door. My mother stood at the top of the staircase and watched. She did not come down. She watched me go like she was watching weather pass through, something unpleasant that couldn't be controlled and would eventually be over. I looked up at her at the last second, right before my father opened the door. She looked away first. The rain hit me like a slap. The gate clicked. The house glowed warm behind those iron bars. Every window lit up, my family inside it, and me on the outside of it, in November in Atlanta with bare feet and 103 fever and a secret in my head that was already starting to feel less like a wound and more like a weapon I hadn't figured out how to use yet. I walked. I don't know how long. I know I made it about 6 blocks before my legs stopped cooperating, and I sat down on the curb in front of a house on Habersham Road, and a woman walking her dog in a raincoat found me there. Her name was Dr. Nadia Osei. She was a cardiologist at Emory, coming home late from a shift, and she did not hesitate for a single second. She got me into her car. She drove me to the Emory ER herself. She sat with me in the waiting room while they processed me, and when the nurses asked who my emergency contact was, Dr. Osei said, "She's with me," with a quiet authority that made the nurse write it down and move on. They found double pneumonia. The fever had been masking it. A doctor named Parrish told me that another few hours outside in that cold rain, and it could have been significantly more serious than it already was. He said it with the carefully controlled expression of a man who was choosing not to say what he was actually thinking about the circumstances of how I'd ended up there. 3 hours after my father threw me into that storm, the police called my parents and told them their 15-year-old was in the Emory University Hospital emergency room. And when my father walked through those doors, his hands wouldn't stop shaking, not because he'd seen me lying in a hospital bed, but because of who was sitting next to me, because he knew her. Because the last time he'd seen Dr. Nadia Osei, she hadn't been a doctor at all. She had been a name in a file he thought he'd buried for good. My father's hands shook because Randall Voss was a man who had spent his entire adult life building walls between himself and the things he'd done, and Dr. Nadia Osei was standing on the wrong side of one of those walls, calm as a Sunday morning, one hand resting on the arm of my hospital bed. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you have been waiting a very long time for this exact moment and you refuse to let it make you ugly. Just clear, just steady, like she'd rehearsed this in the mirror and decided that dignity was the most devastating thing she could wear. I didn't understand it yet. I was 15 and sick and running on adrenaline and antibiotics and the particular euphoric wrongness of a fever that had finally broken. What I understood was that my father's face had gone a color I had never seen on it. Not white exactly, more the color of old ash. And that my mother, who had walked in 2 steps behind him, stopped so abruptly when she saw Dr. Osei that her heels made a sound on the linoleum like a punctuation mark. I understood that neither of them looked at me first. They looked at her, and she let them look. And then, very quietly, very deliberately, Dr. Nadia Osei said, "Hello, Randall, Diane," not Mr. and Mrs. Voss, first names. And in that usage of first names was an entire history I was only beginning to understand the outline of. My mother recovered first. She always recovered first. Diane Voss had the emotional regulation of a woman who had been trained from girlhood to never let a room see her bleed. She said, "Georgia, thank God you're all right," and she moved toward me, and every part of that movement was performed. Every inch of it was theater, and I watched Dr. Osei watch my mother, and I saw something in the doctor's eyes that I would not have had words for at 15, but can name now with absolute precision. It was pity, not for me, for my mother. The kind of pity that comes from knowing that the woman performing love for her daughter in a hospital room has not yet realized that the audience has changed. Because I had already been talking to Dr. Osei for 3 hours, and in those 3 hours, she had told me everything. 16 years before that November night, before Sloan and I were born, before the Buckhead estate, before the Atlanta Homes and Lifestyles features, Randall Voss had been a mid-level developer with a promising portfolio and a problem. The problem had a name, a young architect named Nadia Osei, who had designed the first luxury development that put his name on the map. A 40-unit residential complex in Inman Park that had won a regional design award and launched the Voss brand into a completely different market tier. Nadia had been his contractor's young associate, brilliant and meticulous, and working for a percentage that she had been promised in writing would include a full design credit and a share of the development profits. When the project sold for 3 times the projected number, Randall Voss had restructured the contractor agreement, cut Nadia out of the profit share on a legal technicality his lawyer had engineered specifically for that purpose, and ensured that her name appeared nowhere on the final development documents. Her design credit was absorbed into the firm's portfolio as a collaborative work product. She got a check for $11,000. He made $7.4 million. She had tried to fight it. She'd hired a lawyer with money she didn't have, and Randall Voss's legal team had made the process so lengthy and expensive and personally damaging, questioning her competence, her original contributions, her professional conduct, that she eventually had to drop the case or lose everything she had left. She went back to school instead, medicine, started over, became Dr. Nadia Osei, cardiologist, Emory University Hospital, Buckhead, Atlanta. She had moved back to this city deliberately, she had made herself successful deliberately, and she had been waiting, not with bitterness exactly, more with the patience of someone who knows the math will eventually work out in their favor, for a moment like the one she was standing in right now. She had not planned me, but she was not going to waste me. Here is what else she had told me in those 3 hours, and this is the part that cracked something open in my chest in a way that hasn't fully closed since. The text messages I had seen on Sloane's phone that night, the ones that sent her into a panic, the ones that triggered the lie that got me thrown out, were between Sloane and a man named Cord Fairfax. Cord Fairfax was 41 years old. He was one of my father's business associates. He had a wife and 2 kids in Virginia Highland, and he had been in a relationship with my 16-year-old sister for 7 months. The bruise on Sloane's arm that she'd told my parents I had given her, Cord Fairfax had given her that bruise during an argument 2 days before in the parking deck of the Phipps Plaza Mall, when she had told him she thought she might be pregnant. She hadn't been. But that was what the panic was about. That was what she'd been trying to bury when she buried me instead. She had not calculated the lie coldly, as I had always believed. She had calculated it in terror. She was 16 and terrified, and she had done a terrible thing to me because she was desperate. And the terrible thing about understanding that, truly understanding it, is that it doesn't make it hurt any less. It just makes it more complicated. My father walked to my bedside eventually. He tried to take my hand. I let him, because I had learned in the last year that letting people think they have your hand is sometimes the most strategic thing you can do. He said he was sorry. He said he had been too hasty. He said that he loved me and that they could talk about everything once I was better. His voice had the particular wobble of a man who is apologizing less for what he did and more for being caught in a room with the evidence of it. I looked at his face, really looked at it, and I saw it. The way his eyes kept moving to Dr. Osei in the corner, the way the apology was being performed for her as much as for me. He was afraid of what she knew. He was apologizing to me because apologizing to me in front of her was cheaper than whatever she might do if he didn't. 15-year-old me didn't say any of this out loud. 15-year-old me just looked at him and said, "Okay, Daddy," and filed every single thing away. I stayed in the hospital for 5 days. Dr. Osei came by every morning on rounds and every evening before she went home. My parents came in shifts. My mother for appearances, my father for management. Sloane came once, on day 3, and sat in the chair by the window and didn't say anything for 45 minutes. And then she said, "I know you hate me." And I said, "I don't hate you," because it was true, and also because it was the thing most likely to make her more afraid than hatred would. She left looking worse than she'd arrived. Good. Before I was discharged, Dr. Osei sat with me one last time, and she said something I've carried for 16 years. She said, "The goal is never to become the thing that hurt you. The goal is to become so thoroughly yourself that the thing that hurt you becomes irrelevant." She gave me her personal cell phone number on a prescription slip. She said, "If you ever need anything, a recommendation letter, a reference, a person who will pick up the phone at 2 in the morning, call me." I folded that prescription slip and I put it inside the lining of my winter coat next to my journal. and I went home, and I waited. 16 years is a long time to wait. It is, it turns out, exactly enough time. I'm 31 now. I have a master's degree in financial forensics from Georgetown and a practice in Washington, D.C., where I specialize in asset recovery and estate litigation, which is a polished way of saying that I find money that wealthy people try to hide and I make sure it goes where it was always supposed to go. I am very good at my job. I am very good at my job because of everything Randall and Diane Voss taught me about the way money moves inside families that think they're untouchable. I've been based in D.C. for 6 years. I came back to Atlanta 3 months ago. I came back because my grandmother, my father's mother, Eugenia Voss, who was the only person in that family who had ever looked at me without an agenda, died and left me something. Not money. Something better. She left me her personal papers, 60 years of correspondence, financial records, and one very old, very specific handwritten letter that explained exactly how the Voss family fortune had been structured in the generation before my father inherited it. And what that letter told me changed the architecture of everything I thought I understood about what my father had built and what he owed. The Voss family wealth did not originate with Randall's real estate empire. It originated with a partnership agreement made in 1961 between my grandfather, Hugh Voss, and his business partner, a black architect named Solomon Osei. Solomon Osei, who designed the original commercial properties that Hugh Voss developed and sold for generational wealth. Solomon Osei, who was written out of the partnership in 1967 through a document that my grandfather's lawyers had backdated. Solomon Osei died in 1974, leaving behind a daughter named Nadia. You understand now. You understand why her hands were steady when she walked into that hospital room. You understand why she'd come back to Atlanta. You understand why she'd waited. We had been waiting in parallel our whole lives, and neither of us had known it until a storm pushed a sick 15-year-old girl into her path on Habersham Road. Dr. Nadia Osei and I had dinner 2 weeks after I came back to Atlanta. She is 57 now. She has the kind of beauty that looks like it was built rather than born, something architectural about it, something that took time and intention. We sat at a corner table at Bacchanalia, and we laid out everything we each had between us, and by the time dessert arrived, we had a plan that we had been, in some cosmic way, building toward for 31 years between the two of us. My documentation, her documentation, the letter from Eugenia Voss, my grandmother, who had known, who had always known, and who had chosen her moment and chosen me to deliver it, and a property rights attorney named Claudette Marsh, who had been waiting for a case exactly like this one for the better part of a decade. The filing happened on a Tuesday morning in February, in the Fulton County courts, quiet as a held breath. A claim for unjust enrichment and recovery of misappropriated intellectual and physical property assets reaching back through 2 generations of Voss family development, totaling, with interest and adjusted market value, somewhere north of $40 million. Randall Voss's attorney called him on a Tuesday at approximately 10:45 in the morning. I know this because I was sitting in a coffee shop on Peachtree Street and I watched my father walk out of his office building across the street, phone pressed to his ear, and I watched his face do the thing it had done in that hospital room 16 years ago, the color leaving, the hands going still and then starting to shake, the particular frozen quality of a man who has just been told that something he buried has come back up through the ground. I finished my coffee. I did not go to him. I did not need to. The part about Sloan, I need to finish that because it's not what you think. I did not go after Sloan. I made a choice about Sloan that surprised even Dr. Osei when I told her. Cord Fairfax had been investigated 2 years prior for a separate matter involving a 17-year-old in Cobb County, a case that had been settled quietly and buried. I found it. I handed it, along with a comprehensive documentation of his relationship with my sister that I had reconstructed from the phone records she'd never thought to delete from the shared family cloud account, which my father had been paying for this whole time because Randall Voss was meticulous about everything except the things closest to him, to a prosecutor I knew through my D.C. practice who had contacts in the Fulton County DA's office. Cord Fairfax was arrested in March. He is currently awaiting trial. His wife left him the same day the arrest made the news. His name appeared in the Atlanta Business Chronicle under circumstances that ended his professional life. Sloan called me the night of the arrest. She had my number. I had sent it to her 3 weeks before, in a text that said only, "When you're ready." She called me and she cried. Real crying this time, not the performed kind, not the weapon kind. And she said, "I didn't know it would go that far with him. I didn't know what he was." And I said, "I know." Because I did. Because I had read the texts on her phone that night, and I had understood even at 15 with a fever and bare feet that my sister was not a villain. She was a scared teenage girl who made a devastating choice. The thing she did to me was real, and it caused real damage, and it was also not the whole story of who she was. Holding both of those truths at the same time is the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm still doing it. She asked me if I forgave her. I said, "I'm working on it." That's the most honest thing I've ever said in my life. She said that was enough. We didn't hug. We didn't do a big emotional moment. We made plans to have coffee. We have had coffee twice since then. It is careful, and it is awkward, and it is maybe the beginning of something real, which is more than I thought we'd ever have, and possibly more than we deserve, both of us, on our respective sides of the mess we made of each other.
My mother is a different story. My mother is the chapter I haven't finished yet. Diane Voss called me in April, 6 weeks after the filing. She did not call to apologize. She called to negotiate. She said, in that beautiful, controlled voice of hers, that she believed we could find a way to resolve this privately, and that dragging the family through litigation would hurt everyone involved. I let her finish. I said, "Mom, I know about the 1967 document. I know you found it in Granddaddy Hugh's papers when he died 14 years ago. I know you showed it to Dad, and I know you both made a decision to keep it and do nothing. I know because Grandma Eugenia wrote it down. She wrote everything down. She gave it to me." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. And then my mother said, in a voice I had never heard from her before, small, stripped of all that cultivated control, "Georgia." Just my name, like a question she didn't know how to ask. I said, "I'll see you in court, Mom," and I hung up. I'm not going to tell you it felt good. The movies want you to feel good here. The podcast wants a moment of triumphant music. What it actually felt like was grief, the particular exhausted grief of loving parents who were never going to be what you needed them to be. And finally, after 31 years of hoping otherwise, stopping the hoping. It felt like putting something down that had been very heavy for a very long time. It felt like breathing in a room after the windows have finally been opened. Not joy, just air, just space, just the particular grace of having done the thing that needed to be done and having done it without becoming someone you'll need to apologize for later. The settlement was reached in June, $43 million to the Osei Estate Trust, structured over 5 years, with a formal public acknowledgement, published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and the Atlanta Business Chronicle, of Solomon Osei's foundational contributions to the Voss development portfolio and the circumstances by which those contributions were obscured. Dr. Nadia Osei stood on the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse on the day of the announcement in a white linen suit, and she looked, for the first time since I had known her, like she had put something down too. She looked lighter. She looked like her father. And me? I still live in D.C. I come back to Atlanta maybe once a month now. I get coffee with my sister. I have not spoken to my parents since June, and I don't know yet if I ever will. I kept the journal I wrote at 14. I kept the prescription slip with Dr. Osei's number on it, though I don't need it anymore. I have her in my phone under N, and she texts me on my birthday every year. And once she sent me a picture of the Inman Park development, the one her father designed, the one my grandfather stole, with a caption that said, "They put his name on the plaque."
They did. Nadia had asked for it as part of the settlement terms. Solomon Osei Architect, 1961. 40 years late and absolutely right on time. The thing I want you to walk away with, if you're a girl who's been thrown out of somewhere you were supposed to belong, if you're a woman who's been told her version of events doesn't count, if you're anyone who has ever been standing at the bottom of someone else's marble steps in a storm with bare feet, is this: the cold doesn't last, the fever breaks. Someone will find you on a curb eventually if you can just keep moving long enough. And the thing they threw you out for knowing, keep knowing it. Write it down, date it, name it, file it where they'll never think to look. Because the most dangerous woman in any room is not the one who screams. It's the one who has been quiet for 16 years, who has been building something in that silence, who walks back through the front door of her family's legacy on a Tuesday morning in February and files a $43 million truth in the Fulton County courts. It's not revenge. Revenge is reactive. Revenge is theirs, not yours. What I did was something older and quieter and more permanent than revenge. I call it return. I gave back what was stolen to the person it was stolen from. I told the truth in a room where the truth had been kept out for 60 years. And then I walked out of that courthouse into June sun in Atlanta, and I put on my sunglasses, and I drove through Buckhead on my way to the airport, and I passed the estate on Habersham Road, where I had sat on a curb at 15 in the rain. I did not stop. I did not need to. I just kept driving. The windows down, the radio up, Atlanta behind me and ahead of me at the same time, the way it always is when you're from a place that both made you and tried to break you. I kept driving. That's all. That's everything. That's the whole story. And the whole story, it turns out, was always enough.
Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.